Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the February 2024 meeting of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. My name is Alan Bowser. I'm the president of Civic Federation. Thank you all for joining us this evening, which should be a very exciting program. We're going to dispatch some Civic Federation official business before we get to our program. And the first thing is to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting, February 12th, 2024. I'd like to amend it to add the election of co-chairs for our Land Use and Planning Committee and the members of our Special Housing Committee. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda, which is on page 2 of the Civic Federation News. Is there a
motion to approve the agenda?
Is there a second?
I second.
It's been first and second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That's sufficient. The next order of business is the approval of the January meeting minutes, January 8th, 2024. They're on page 12 of the Civic Federation News. Is there a motion to approve the January minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any comments? All those in favor of approving the January 2024 minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hands. Say aye. Thank you so much. The minutes are approved. Next order of business is the treasurer's report. Treasurer's report. Jerry Garson.
In the last 30 days, we had received $119 worth of dues, all through Simply Dues, and we had $200 of expenses for our annual post office box. And so far this year, we've collected $1,690 worth of dues, and our current bank balance is $7,717. If there are any questions, speak to me later.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. At this point in the program, we welcome announcements from members about the events in their community. We have a special guest tonight that we invite to talk to us. Chris, Betty, can you say something quickly about Simply Dues?
Yes, so Simply Dues help civic associations do membership management and dues collection and other fundraising from their membership. It lets members join. It gives reminders every year when the subscription period ends to renew your dues the following year, hopefully increasing dues payment year over year without additional advertising from the board. So please join. It's simple to set up. You can reach out to me at cbetti@gmail.com, and I can help you get started.
And what's the website address?
It is www.simplidues.com.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody have any other announcements about developments in their neighborhoods that they want to share with the group? I see Peggy, you have an announcement.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay, good. I went out with a number of the volunteers from the group called Tree Friends United several days ago to start working with them on cutting the vines that are growing up along so many of our street trees and smothering and killing them. It was very instructive. I'm now working with them on putting together text and hopefully soon a video that can be used to train volunteers from anywhere in the county. And I think it should be very successful. We really need to get in hundreds more. Tree Friends United has 140 volunteers already. They mainly work around the Glen Echo area. But we really need thousands of volunteers to get this going because this is becoming a major environmental problem, not just for the county, but the entire Eastern Seaboard. That's all.
Well, thanks, Peggy. If you have some information you want to put in the chat, please do. Carrie Lamar, your hand is up.
Yes, couple people wanted to put 824 onto the agenda, but you moved so fast, I don't think people had a chance. I was looking for my hand to raise, on the screen. And it is an emergency situation. Next Thursday, I think they're going to be voting from the delegation to see if the delegation supports it. I'm thinking that people wanted to have a little discussion and vote on it, vote to oppose it.
Well, let's
Okay.
let's take it up after our guest speaker this evening when we're doing
Well, I
committee stuff.
think you need to put it on the agenda, to be considered as an emergency legislation, and that's what my motion is put it on the agenda as an emergency. I know it needs 5 seconds, and I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. We'll take it up at the end of our meeting. Let's get into the featured presentation this evening. We are very blessed to have Gwen Wright, former planning director, Montgomery County, as our guest this evening. The general subject is housing issues in the county. I know that's a great interest to people in the Federation. She is a subject matter expert. She has been the planning board director. She was in charge of historic preservation in the county. She's been the planning director in Alexandria, and she knows more about this issue than anybody I know. I've been working with Gwen since the early aughts, when she was in charge of the historic preservation portfolio in Montgomery County. It was a pleasure to work with her, and I was glad when she became the planning director in the county. She was kind enough to join us this evening, and she's going to share some of her observations and her experiences about planning and housing issues. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Gwen to talk to us about Montgomery County housing issues. Gwen.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. And it's a pleasure to be here this evening. It's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces, folks who I've known for several decades in my work in Montgomery County. I'm now a civilian. I am retired, and I am enjoying my retirement, and but still following things that are happening in Montgomery County and tracking a lot of the activities. What I wanted to do was just offer a few thoughts about housing. I know that it's an ongoing issue, that it's something that continues to be a very big discussion in the county. I understand that the Attainable Housing Initiative may be coming back up before the planning board, and that there will be a number of opportunities for comment. So I want to just start with talking a little bit about what sort of the world of housing is and how it was addressed in Thrive, Montgomery. Montgomery County is a leader in housing throughout the United States. People always are calling Montgomery County to find out how we do things. The whole inclusionary zoning that started in 1974 with the MPDU program is, nationally renowned. Our very, very aggressive housing initiative fund that helps fund lots of housing projects throughout the county is, looked at by others who try to emulate it. We are in many ways a great success as a county on the housing front, but we're also continuing, like many other communities throughout the state and throughout the region and throughout the country, we're dealing with sort of unprecedented housing challenges. And I think that that is something that is here. It's going to have to be dealt with. It's not going away. And it needs something that is really going to put everyone, have everyone working together to try to achieve it. In Thrive, we spent a lot of time thinking about housing, and the subtitle of the housing chapter, I think, is really critical. That subtitle is More of Everything. And it basically says that it isn't just a problem that's going to be solved with a solitary approach, that we need to do everything from creating more MPTUs to preserving existing, what used to be called naturally occurring affordable housing. We need to create housing for not only very low income people, but for middle income people. I mean, that's another thing that Thrive really emphasized, is that the housing problem isn't just about subsidized housing for low income households. It's really about encompassing the needs of middle income people as well. It suggested a series of policies that need to be pursued in order to deal with our housing problem. And those included in having more density along corridors, particularly the corridors that are going to have transit, more certainly income restricted units for low income or deeply affordable housing, innovative construction techniques to try to reduce the cost of housing, using public land and religiously owned parcels of land to find additional sites to build housing. Some regulatory flexibility, more financing options and incentives, and using a variety of creative housing options such as missing middle, co-housing, ADUs, and social housing. And that housing was a central point that was related to the three big goals in Thrive of equity, economic growth, and the environment. And I just saw Carrie ask, do you know why I'm here? Well, I'm here because Alan invited me, and because he knows that I have a lot of information about housing, and that I worked in this field for many, many years. So I'm spending a lot of time working on this topic in my retirement with different organizations, including the American Planning Association, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and other groups. And I have hopefully some information that will be helpful. In the planning department, there was a major effort to follow up from Thrive with the Attainable Housing Initiative. And my understanding is that which was sort of on a hiatus for a while the planning department was recovering from the last couple chaotic years, is now coming back up, and that there's going to be a planning board briefing on the topic on February 22nd of this year, and an opportunity for public comment on March 21st. And then there will be a series of work sessions. I'm assuming you all know that and that you have those dates marked on your calendar. So in the attainable housing initiative, there are really sort of, I would say, two significant components that I think the Civic Federation is going to want to focus on. One relates to the idea of creating more housing along corridors. And I mentioned that was a big focus of Thrive, of figuring out how to add additional density along corridors, particularly corridors that are going to have different forms of transit, including BRT, and to create a new optional method of zoning for corridor housing that would require a site plan review. That's one component of the Attainable Housing Initiative. The other component is what many people have called the missing middle, of adding the opportunity to, in single-family neighborhoods, have different housing types, including duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, cottage courtyards, a variety of different options. And that is an idea that is in the Attainable Housing Initiative, with the goal of creating pattern books, which are essentially like guidelines, so that new housing of this type or form can fit in and be compatible with the existing single-family neighborhoods. Those are two separate elements of the Attainable Housing Initiative, and I think it's important probably for the Civic Federation to think about and pay some attention to this, and to offer input and get involved in the process. There's also, as most of you probably know, state legislation happening. And that goes back to the point that I was making, which is the issue of housing is not going to go away. It is viewed as a critical issue, not just to the future of Montgomery County, but to the future of the state. And it's even been discussed by HUD as something that there could even be eventually federal legislation about housing issues. It's really not going to go away. And so I think, it's time to sort of grab that bull by the horns and figure out a way to deal with it. The state legislation, as I understand it, includes 3 bills. One, to expand housing options that would affect properties in Montgomery County. Another, to attract more federal funding for housing. And a third, to enhance protections against eviction for renters. I have to tell you, I'm not an expert on the state legislation. I haven't been spending my whole retirement looking at legislation at the state of Maryland. But, I do know that the first bill in particular, I've heard that there are some concerns that people have with how it will be implemented in vis-a-vis local zoning. There's a lot of county legislation that's also out there. Again, I assume you all are tracking and are aware of Bill 3322, which is something that has been promoted to co-locate, to really assure that co-locating housing on public land is taken very seriously and is done. I think that during my tenure, I think we had a lot of opportunities to do maybe a little bit more and be a little more innovative with housing on public land, and for one reason or another, those opportunities never didn't, I won't say never, didn't always come to fruition. I remember a long discussion about putting housing on top of a fire station in the White Flint neighborhood, for example. When I worked in Alexandria, they did put 64 units of affordable housing on top of the new fire station in Potomac Yards, and that's been really, really successful. We haven't yet really had a great example of that kind of co-location in Montgomery County. When I was planning director, we put together a co-location committee, and we tried to get all the department heads together to look for co-location opportunities, but it's a challenge. Every department has their own program of requirements for what they want out of new capital improvement projects, and it's not always easy to get folks to think outside the box. I also understand that there was a ZTA about eliminating parking requirements near transit, and a ZTA that was last year about reducing review times for affordable housing projects. So there's clearly a lot of interest at the state, at the county, in the planning department on housing issues. And this is, I think that what my message, which I shared with Alan, is that this is happening one way or another. There are going to be changes in terms of how the county deals with housing, and this is the time to get involved, to work, to find solutions that are going to be helpful to the community, and work to find solutions that are going to create more housing for our children and our grandchildren. So I think that's about all that I wanted to share. I do have, lots of thoughts in my head, and I'm glad to talk to you all about that. I'm glad to talk to you about Thrive, what it does say, what it doesn't say. I'm glad to talk about the Attainable Housing Initiative. I mean, I think that's, to me, the sort of critical thing, since those dates are coming right up for the Attainable Housing Initiative to move forward. And I'm assuming that you all are going to be involved in taking a position and offering comments. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Gwen, for joining us this evening. I do think that we'll have a lot of questions from this group. Members, people in the audience, if you have questions that you'd like to ask, please use the raise hand function, which is under the reactions icon on the bottom of the page. Ira Unger, I see your hand. You can go first.
Hi, thanks. I have a lot of questions. Could you talk a little bit about the homelessness in Montgomery County?
Well, I have to admit that isn't something that I have as much expertise on. I do know that in Thrive, there was a reference to the Housing First initiative, which the county is working on, that really talks about developing some strategies to provide permanent supportive housing for unsheltered populations.
I mean, do we have a homelessness problem, and
Yes.
Could you quantify it a little bit?
No, I can't. I don't have that information, but yes, we do. And there have been several developments that have been built in the county that were built during my tenure as opportunities to provide housing for both homeless individuals and homeless families. I think we do have a particular issue with homeless families, and there have been transitional housing developments for those families. I believe that there is one that was just relatively recently built in the White Flint, North Bethesda area. I think everyone knows about Progress Place in Silver Spring. They're very challenging because it's not just providing the physical space, it's providing the sort of wraparound services. And I think most of the homeless housing is dealt with by the department, HHS, Health and Human Services. And I think that that might be a great future program for the Civic Federation. But yes, absolutely, there is a homeless problem, and there are some facilities that have been constructed. Again, Progress Place in quite a few years ago now, but then a relatively recently new one in North Bethesda.
And where would you draw the line between low income and middle income housing?
Usually it's done depending on the percentage of the area median income. The area median income is, again, rough numbers, is around $100,000. A little bit lower, a little bit higher some years, but around $100,000. Generally, workforce housing is considered to be people who make between 80 to 120% of the area median income. Moderate income folks are at about 60% of the area median income. Low income is generally considered in the 30 to 50% of the area median income.
Terrific information. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Ira. Who's indicated at 692-957? Who's that?
Peggy,
Hey, Peggy Albert, go ahead.
I have a somewhat related question. I'm making the assumption that these changes in housing structures and development will increase population. What's being done for infrastructure? The traffic right now is unbearable. And schools, public transportation. My question is related to infrastructure. How is that going to happen before the onslaught of the increase of population?
So again, some of you may know we have an adequate public facilities ordinance in Montgomery County, and there's something called the Growth and Infrastructure Policy, which is being discussed, I think, this year. And that Growth and Infrastructure Policy lays out the rules about what new development has to have in place in terms of schools and transportation before it can move forward. So, that's a detailed and deep topic. If you're interested, I think you need to, again, probably have someone come in and talk about the Growth and Infrastructure Policy, which is being updated. And, every project in the county has to adhere to that Growth and Infrastructure Policy that looks at school capacity and transportation capacity. The main infrastructure that's being built in the county, and this is a decision of the county in terms of transportation, is that they're mainly building transit, not new roads. And so the infrastructure that you're seeing going in are things like BRT lines and more buses, not so much building or widening roads.
I guess you're not the person to answer my question, obviously. But my concern is I live on Clarkson Road between Connecticut and Georgia Avenue, and they're building another shopping center on the corner of Pliers Mill Road in Connecticut. Traffic's already backed up on that light. So you're not the one to answer it, but it's making me initiate this question when I see what's happening. So that's, I don't see what you're saying that they planned, because there was no planning involved in the building of this, considering the traffic that goes through Pliers Mill in Connecticut. But I thank you
Well,
very much.
Yeah, I know the project you're talking about, but I don't know the details of what they had to provide or prove when they went through their approval process to tear down that old gas station and put in the additional retail that they're putting in now. I can't tell you what the adequate public facilities discussion was, but when they got approval, they did have to do something regarding adequate public facilities, but I don't know what it was.
You ain't doing nothing.
No,
Peggy,
they
we'll
aren't
check.
definitely not
Okay.
widening any roads.
Peggy, we'll check on
Yeah.
that, see if we can get you some information. Should all be part of a public discussion. Peggy
Thank
Dennis.
you.
Yes, Gwen, is there any office in the county government that works to promote shared housing as opposed to the building of additional separate dwelling units? And by shared housing, I'm thinking of the large, lots of spare room, would probably love to have someone come and live with them for a modest rent. If there was only someone to help facilitate matching up and making sure that things work out amicably. The other kind is the shared housing where you have 3 or 4 young adults who get together and rent a house together. Both of those are very helpful in putting particularly young and single people into units with very, very modest rents.
I agree completely. And I don't think that there is actually like an office in the county government to serve as a clearinghouse for that. And I think that's a great idea, actually. I know, for example, I had a friend who was divorced and needed to move, and she ended up renting a room in a large house in Germantown. And that is allowed under the law. You don't have to go through any review or approval to rent a certain number of rooms in your house. And, I agree with you completely that is a great opportunity to provide another type of housing, particularly for single adults. And I don't believe there is any government agency looking at that as being a clearinghouse for that. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you for the question, Peggy. Tony Byrne.
Thanks, Alan. And thanks, Gwen, for coming here. Just wanted to also say congratulations for your work on Thrive, our neighborhood, North Woodside. Had a very comprehensive community survey around this topic of Thrive, and you may be interested to know that nearly 70% of the participants were in favor of Thrive. When it came down to the 6 different categories under Thrive, the favor went up, in some cases 9.5 to 1. And I think you really tapped into a lot of core values of people in our community with the work that you did there. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a little bit about missing middle. So just quickly, can you just educate me what a cottage courtyard is?
Well, what it can be, and we don't have any in Montgomery County at this time, probably the closest thing that we have is the redevelopment of the police station in Silver Spring, and the name of that development is not in East Silver Spring, is not springing to my mind, but created a series of relatively small townhouses and on a piece of land that had been the old police station. In other communities, what you see is perhaps several lots that might have had single family homes on them being combined, and a series of smaller houses being constructed that share parking and that share open space. There's a very nice example in Northern Virginia that was done. I think it's called the Railroad Cottages, and I think it's in Falls Church. And it was done as actually a senior housing project, and it on attractive land built 10 small cottages, each of which is individually owned, but the entire property is a condominium. And they share the outdoor maintenance. They have one parking area, so people have to park there and then walk to their cottage. And they have a community building. And they, have found that to be a way to sort of create community, but not, but still have single family individual homes, people who want a certain level of privacy, but also want the sense that they're part of a community. And I see Karen Roper told me Art Space is the name of the development in Silver Spring. I go away and retire, and all these things leave my brain. But Art Space is probably the closest, I would say, to something like that we have in Montgomery County. But regionally, the example I would point to is Railroad Cottages in Falls. It's called Railroad Cottages in Falls Church.
Okay, well, thank you very much for filling me in. That was all.
Thank you, Tony. Cheryl Gannon.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, Gwen.
Hi.
I have a question. A lot of times I hear policymakers talk about zone capacity as if it's the same thing as housing supply. In other words, when we zone, we'll get housing. That's not always true. We have lots of approvals that don't get built. You can increase housing without changing zoning. You could also change zoning and not increase housing. And those terms get conflated quite a bit. So I guess my question is, are there other jurisdictions that have dealt with the problem of what I think is called land banking, where you increase the value of your property through a zoning change? You're not really intending to do anything anytime soon. Because I think the more land you take up and don't use, the more scarce land becomes and costs go up. I mean, there's lots of harms from it.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if there are tools or ways to address it.
That's a great question. It is very hard to deal with. It is very hard to require owners to develop their property if they don't want to develop it. A lot of people buy property and sit on it for a very long time. The only thing that I can think of that, and it's not a direct analogy, but it could be considered, is in certain jurisdictions, you are taxed at a higher rate if you have a vacant, uninhabited commercial property. And that is an effort to try to discourage commercial landlords from, putting tenants out and then just waiting for a higher paying tenant. And so there are jurisdictions that basically tax you at a higher rate if you have a vacant property that has been vacant for, a specified period of time. There's nothing like that today in Montgomery County, but you could even, consider something like that on vacant land, which is if it has been vacant and it has not been, put to a good use for a certain period of time, you could increase the taxes. And that becomes an incentive. That program doesn't exist today, but it's actually an interesting idea.
Thank you.
Thank you for
And
the
I
question.
did want to say, I want to give Woodside a little shout out because many, many years ago, when I was doing historic preservation, again, it wasn't exactly a missing middle project, but we worked to have several older properties that faced Georgia Avenue relocated, and a series of townhouses that were designed and meant to fit in with the character of the single family neighborhood. So they were short sticks of townhouses was built, and that's now been part of the community for, you know, I don't know, it's been 25 years probably. It's been a long time. But that was a project I worked on a whole lot back in the day. And the folks in Woodside, I think, had misgivings about it initially, but ended up working to find, you know, some common ground, and ended up with a development that I think is a good example of how you can, you know, increase density along a corridor in a way that supports the existing single-family neighborhood that is adjacent to the corridor. So, yay for Woodside.
Thank you. I would just like to add to that shout out. We're having a very interesting discussion right now with the church about that building 100% income restricted affordable housing on the church property. And the community has been very open to the idea.
Right.
Thank you for the question, Cheryl. That's a beautiful townhouse project on, that's sort of the intersection of 16th Street and Georgia Avenue, correct? Yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful project. Peter,
Georgia and Noise, the other side.
Yeah, Georgia and Noise. Yeah.
okay. Peter James. You have to unmute.
Yes,
There
I'm
you go.
going to go on a bit of a rant. First of all, none of this all matters if we're all extinct. Hawking said in 2005 that the AI is going to be an extinction event, and it's happening today. So I want you guys to look at that. But I propose some, and actually we're talking to MDOT now. There's a transit and housing and urban use go hand in hand. And the paradigms that we're using now are 30 to a couple hundred years old, as far as you know, trying to put high density housing in transit corridors. So there's some technology. The City Council of San Jose has announced a personal rapid transit system connector to the airport. They also announced that they were going to put a citywide network in. This would, Maryland has the second worst congestion in the nation. This would totally eliminate congestion. And what I'm proposing is little e-trikes that would run on these guideways, but would deliver themselves to your door for people, particularly low income. So rather, you know, the need to put high density housing next to transit stops is because, you know, a lot of low income people don't have cars. I went to, when they did the corridor forward study, I proposed it to the planning department, and they told me, I said, well, why don't you consider it as an alternative? They said, we don't know what it is, and we can't afford to hire a consultant to tell us. And then when there was supposed to be an open meeting on the corridor forward plan for 270, Casey Anderson closed the meeting. And so I'm wondering why the planning department and the rest of the county is so close to new technology that solves all these problems.
Thank you, Peter. Gwen?
Well, the only thing I would say is I think the county is open to new technologies. I think our experience has been that new technologies take the ones we think are going to move forward, like even self-driving cars, you know, autonomous vehicles, all those things. We've been talking about that for the last 5 years, but we aren't seeing very many people actually using autonomous vehicles. And in fact, some of the folks who are using them are deciding that they aren't safe and are taking them away. So I don't think that there is a lack of interest in looking at very, very innovative kinds of technologies, but I think there's also a realization that those are long-term solutions. They aren't going to address a lot of the immediate issues that we have, and that although it's not bad to spend some time looking at it, I think we end up focusing attention on the more immediate challenges that we have before us. I'm not saying that, really interesting, innovative technologies are not something we should be looking at, but I do think that they don't provide the kinds of solutions to our immediate problems that we end up having people pounding on the door wanting solutions to.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. No, Peter, please, if you'd like to write an article about that and send it to the Civic Federation, we'll be happy to put it in our newsletter. Jerry Garson.
I just say that there's a PRT that was built 50 years ago that eliminated congestion in Morgantown. They haven't had a single serious injury or crash in 50 years. They achieved Vision Zero. It carries 1.5 times as the entire MARC train system in Maryland per day. So,
Thank you, Peter. I know this is an issue of interest to you. If you'd like to write an article, please do.
Okay.
Please mute your mic. And Jerry Garson, you're next.
How come adequate public facilities do not measure capacity on I-270 or I-495? We see that peak AM traffic on the Beltway between 5 and 6 a.m. westbound before University Boulevard. Then after 6 a.m., there's no more additional capacity on the Beltway. Our major roads have reached capacity, but we don't measure them. How come?
I think mainly because they are state roads, and because that is a area that we look to MDOT to address. And they have been looking, as you well know, on ways to address that by putting in toll lanes and by putting in even additional lanes. That's been big discussion for the last, I think, at least 7 or 8 years.
But don't we need that before we build any additional housing in the county? Many people, if you took a vote of the public, you'd see most people would want an absolute moratorium on any new housing being built until we solve the road problem.
Well, I think that the reality is that the people are coming, whether we build the housing or not. If we don't build the housing, they're going to move to Frederick County and Howard County, and the traffic is going to continue to get even worse because people will be in their cars driving from Frederick County and Howard County. It's unless you sort of do a one-child policy like they have in China, where you say everyone can only have one child and we limit the population, the people are coming. It's just not something you can stop, and they need to be housed. And it's like water flowing, out of a glass. If you don't, have a bigger glass, the water will flow up and out, and then everything will be flooded with even more traffic. So, it's not, there's not really a choice to just say, stop building housing. That's not realistic.
Thank you for your question, Jerry. Sheldon Fishman.
Yes, my question is, I was intrigued that you were talking about preserving naturally occurring housing. And it seems to me that the biggest threat to naturally occurring affordable housing is that if you tear down 2 of those and build a triplex, you will have increased the units of housing, but you will have decreased the naturally occurring affordable housing. So is the duplex, triplex zoning, is that actually most attractive to the private sector in terms of tearing down naturally occurring, converting naturally occurring affordable housing? Is that what it does?
Well, I think that the main efforts to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing are to preserve larger housing complexes that are garden apartments or other kinds of housing that have lower rents. And the Department of Housing and Community Affairs does that in a couple of different ways, including a program they have where they have a right of first refusal when older garden apartments are put up for sale, and they can step in to try to either buy them or work with a affordable housing private nonprofit provider to buy the naturally occurring affordable housing and to preserve it. And that's happened on many, many, many complexes throughout Montgomery County. And again, you might want to ask at some point someone from Department of Housing and Community Affairs to talk about their right of first refusal program and the many, many units of naturally occurring affordable housing they've preserved. In terms of single family houses, I think that there are very, very few detached single family houses that would be counted as naturally occurring affordable housing. I think that the majority, I can't remember what the average house price is in Montgomery County, but I think it's well over $300,000. And so I think that the majority of single family homes in the county probably are not very accessible to lower and middle income folks.
Thanks for that question. We'll go to Carrie Lamari, Alan Myers, and then Ira will come back to you. Carrie?
Okay, just to clarify a few things, and I don't want to, sound like I'm arguing with you, Gwen, but the Council of Government said that we have 200,000 people coming. It's not just that the people are coming. They've calculated 200,000, and that even is probably questionable given COVID and some of the other things that has occurred. We have 43,800 units the last time I checked in the pipeline. That is equivalent at 2.8 people per housing unit. That's about 145,000 housing units that are already approved in the pipeline. And then it said of the 200,000 people coming, 75% will be in need of affordable housing. You in yourself, when you were at Park and Planning, had a Silver Spring missing middle study that indicated that the housing cost of missing middle would be around $700,000. So the people that are looking for a 300,000 or less house is still not going to be able to afford that kind of housing. I mean, if you're going to have upzoning and multiplex housing, it should be targeted. It should be the type of housing that specifically is targeted to a group of people that we know is coming, that is going to have the problem. And it shouldn't be carte blanche countywide, because as many people have said in here tonight, we in Montgomery County have a long tradition of not providing the adequate infrastructure necessary to support the housing stock that we build.
Is there a question there,
Carrie?
Carrie?
No, I'm trying to correct some of the information that Gwen is providing. Now she's free to
Carrie, I have to
controvert
just
me.
tell you
Go right ahead.
that you're wrong.
Yeah, last time
And
Casey Anderson said I was wrong with respect to the stormwater management, and of course, I forgot the name of the development on Rockville Pike. Yeah, we're all going to fix our stormwater management problem based on $800 million or $60 million project, right?
so
Yeah.
can I finish? Can I
Carrie,
respond?
please,
Well,
if you have a question, Carrie, ask Gwen to respond to what you said, then we'll move on. Gwen?
Then just don't say I'm wrong. Say why I'm wrong.
Well, because if you would give me an opportunity to say something and to get a word in edgewise, I would. What's really wonderful is right now, I'm not a government employee. So I can express my own viewpoints and I can express my frustrations with the fact that you don't give anyone a chance to get a word in edgewise. So my word in edgewise is that we need to not only that no one is going to build housing for people who make 30 and 50% of the area median income and do it on a market basis. That isn't economically viable. You can't do it. And the only groups that are able to build that sort of housing are the private nonprofit housing providers with heavily subsidized projects using low-income housing tax credits and money from the Housing Incentive Fund and every other resource they can find. And we need to build that kind of housing for people who make 30 to 50% of the area median income, and we need to subsidize it. But we also need housing for people who make 80 to 120% of the area median income, and they can afford properties, but it's not going to be a $700,000 townhouse. It's going to be taking a property that might look like a townhouse and turning that into a duplex with 2 units. So each of them is $350,000. I've seen it happen in Alexandria. I've seen it happen in the District of Columbia. But we have a lot of rules and regulations in Montgomery County that make it so difficult to build those kinds of smaller units that are, again, aesthetically can look like a townhouse or can look like a single family house, but they are smaller and less expensive units. It can be done. It is done in other places, and Montgomery County is behind the times.
Well, you still haven't answered my question. 43,800 units are in the pipeline. What you have indicated is that the market will dictate what will be built. So your solution is to provide a blanket upzoning of this entire county and potentially create
That is not my solution.
Well, then
and I
what
have
is it?
never promoted that solution.
When you talk
My
about
solution
attainable housing
is
and look, can I finish?
Carrie, we have other people who have questions. You're being disrespectful to
I don't
me
see how
and
I'm
to the
being
rest of.
disrespectful.
And so-
You asked Gwen to speak, and she's providing information, and I happen to think a lot of that information is just wrong.
Well, wait
And the
till we
last
have.
time,
We'll come back-
time somebody said something was wrong, it was what's it, Pike and Rose and Casey Anderson telling me that I was wrong, that attainable housing was going to solve the problem for Montgomery County with respect to stormwater management. And he didn't even take into account that the Euclidean zoning doesn't deal with mandatory stormwater management repairs. And we had this discussion on responsible growth. So if you're going to talk, please.
If you have a follow-up question, we'll get it after we have other people speak. Alan Myers.
Yeah, hi, Gwen. Just ask you, are you familiar with the development plans for Battery Lane in Bethesda between Old Georgetown Road and Wisconsin Avenue?
I only know what was discussed during the Bethesda downtown plan. I have to say I'm not familiar with what has been done there recently.
I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but it's basically, as you said, a bunch of garden apartments that are need for redevelopment. As I recall, the number of units there, and I don't know their rents, is far less than the number of affordable housing units that's proposed for that development. And what I often gets me concerned is I hear this buzzword, we're going to have new affordable units, but they're replacing units that are already there that are actually probably maybe more affordable, and there's more of them. And I don't think that's an approach that we need to have on these things. It did bother me that those are nice apartments, at least they were when I used to see them there. I don't know what condition they're in now, but to say that those units are no longer desirable, we could put this nice new development in and have affordable housing. I think it's a misnomer.
So one thing, and I actually looked this up before to tonight's presentation. In Bethesda, since the Bethesda plan was adopted, with the new buildings that have been built, none of which, I don't know about Battery Lane because I don't think anything's been built there yet. But with the other things that have been built that mainly replaced office buildings or replaced other things, we've created 447 new MPDUs in downtown Bethesda that never existed before. That is not what's on Battery Lane or on Bradley Boulevard, where the older garden apartments. There are today over 400 new MPDUs in downtown Bethesda that are on properties that used to be parking lots or vacant office buildings. And so I think that in itself, I know that isn't your question, but I do want to make the point that the development in Bethesda has created a significant number of affordable housing units that never existed before. I do understand that along Battery Lane, there is a concern about tearing down the garden apartments and putting up units that might not have an equal number of affordable. But I think the trick is that the units on Battery Lane are only affordable because of the decision of the current property owners. There's no requirement that the rents on those apartments stay what they are. They could be increased tomorrow. And then they wouldn't be naturally occurring affordable units because they could end up being more expensive units. So I think this is where it has to be a multi-pronged approach. It could be that some of those garden apartments get purchased by, and I believe at least one of them was going to be purchased by a private nonprofit affordable housing organization, and they were going to keep it as a garden apartment and keep it as affordable housing. And some of them transition and have new construction with MPDUs, but I don't think that it can be a sort of blanket idea of saying just let Battery Lane stay exactly as it is, because there are no great controls on the apartments that are there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. We'll come back to you. Ira, then Peggy, Alpert. Ira?
I'm sorry, do you want me or Alan?
I want you.
Okay. All right. So I want to go back to the question I asked before. I'm trying to get a handle on the whole problem. Of the workforce, moderate and low income folks, what is the approximate need and how much is being how much is available now for that, and what are the plans to fill the need?
Well, that's a big question.
I know.
And there was
Take on what you want there.
Yeah, there was a housing needs assessment that was done during the Thrive process, and it is on the website of the planning department. If you go to the planning department and put in the search housing needs assessment, it can provide that information for you. There is absolutely a significant need in the 30 to 50% area median income range.
And then I should also add, people below that, really, really
right.
poor.
Well, that really gets, yes, if you're below 30%, you may be in the situation of really having unstable housing and needing some of the resources that we were talking about earlier regarding transitional housing and some of the other options.
So which of these groups do you think has the biggest need in terms of numbers of people? Let me just ask that.
I would say the biggest need, and probably the most challenging are the 30 to 50% area median income. And you really, through market forces, it's very hard to provide that housing. It needs to be done through partnerships with religious organizations and with private nonprofit housing developers to create, in essence, subsidized housing.
And
You can't build it and pay for it in a regular market situation.
right. And what kind of numbers are we talking about in this 30 to 50%?
I don't have that
Out
off
of our
the
1
top of
million
my head.
population?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I really don't have that off the top of my head. But I would suggest you take a look at the housing needs assessment. And that would have all the detailed facts and figures for you.
And in terms of what's coming down the pipeline, what are there programs that you're aware of that are going to fill it, or do you see it still as a unchecked need?
Well, we
I think
know.
there are some interesting programs that being done through the Housing Opportunities Commission, and some interesting programs being done by groups like MHP and AHC, both of which are private nonprofit affordable housing providers. They all have current projects going on in the county right now. But it's probably not enough. But there are projects that are underway, and the county is helping through the Housing Incentive Fund. They're helping with financing. I mean, again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. Montgomery County is actually very well respected in terms of their housing programs, and they are doing a lot of really good and innovative projects. But we always need more.
Thank you.
I see that somebody's put the link for the housing needs assessment in the chat.
Yeah.
And we'll post some of this on social media. So thank you for that series of questions. Ira, Peggy Albert, then Sheldon Fishman. Peggy?
I'd like to combine two things I've heard, neither of which I'm knowledgeable about. One was the thing about available land. The less there is available, the higher the price for the building. Am I correct? Did I make that?
If there's less land available, it becomes more expensive. Yes.
Right. So okay, thank you. And so how do you connect that concept with the need for more housing and therefore needing the land to do it on with the permits that were given to all these mega houses that are being built in place of these small cottages that are being torn down on very large plots that could have been used for low or middle income housing? And I'm talking about in my backyard on Jennings Road. There are 16 of them up there now that I can count. They're huge. There are 2 people living, maybe 3 or 4, in these humongous houses on very large lots in place of these little cottages that could have been used and maybe fixed up for, as you said, duplexes or little cottage communities. Maybe I'm not saying that right. How do you justify giving them permits to build that and take up that land, destroying those houses, when our need is for low middle income? These houses are going for over $1 million. And
right. So right now, you can't take one of those little houses and turn it into a duplex. It's not allowed.
I'm not talking about. I'm not talking
and
about.
So since it's not allowed by the zoning, the person who owns that little duplex is going to say, well, I'm going to sell it to someone who's going to build a new house. And the new house that they're going to build is going to maximize the square footage that they're allowed to build under the zoning. And
Right,
so,
for the profit for the builder.
right, so
But my
one of the
point
missing
is-
middle ideas is to say, we're going to allow that house to become a duplex rather than to become one big house. And not all of them, but maybe some of them will become duplexes. Someone may choose, like there's a little
Maybe.
house in Tacoma Park that has been redone. It was done by an affordable housing provider it was converted from one house that was in relatively bad shape into two separate houses that are condominium. They looks like one house, but it is two separate houses.
Right.
And they could only do that because of an oddity in that particular lot. Normally, that wouldn't be allowed in the county.
I'm
Peggy,
not saying that
Peggy,
you
Peg-
should.
Peggy, we've got other questions, so if you want to just ask one final question to Gwen on this subject, we would appreciate that.
Why is there any way that could have been done in these little cottages that are being taken down?
No,
We've got to change the
the
zoning.
answer is no.
We have to change the zoning for that. Sheldon Fishman and then Cheryl Gannon.
Yeah, I'd like to start with a comment and then a question. You've talked about MHP. The example that I think of is I live right across the street from Forest Glen Metro Stop, and there's a project under construction right now to turn the really crappy small apartment buildings into a high-density MPH low-income housing project, walking distance to the metro. And so that is a good idea. It's being successfully implemented. And interestingly, my civic association, which is just on the other side of Georgia Avenue, voted unanimously to encourage the county to do that. So I guess we're not NIMBYs. Having said that, since I live so close to the Forest Glen Metro, and it has been, there isn't a problem with zoning in order to put in mixed use, high density housing, but it hasn't existed for 30 years. It's not a zoning problem, right? What needs to be done to get, we have had some townhouses built there right across the street from, but that's not the solution that I think anybody is advocating. They're advocating high density mixed use housing. What needs to be done beyond zoning to get that to happen at Forest Glen Metro, Wheaton Metro, et cetera?
Right. Are you familiar with the project that's been proposed for the medical building right at the Forest Glen Metro? So that we did a plan for Forest Glen and we changed some of the zoning, and that changed zoning incentivized a group to look at redeveloping the medical center building. And they have been going through the regulatory process, and I understand at least meeting with the community on that project. Again, I haven't worked on all of this for over a year, so I don't know the details of where that project stands right now. But that is an example of trying to put a more high density mixed use project right at the metro, right along a corridor. And these projects take years to go through the whole review process, the financing, they don't just sort of pop up, but that project has been being worked on for several years. I know there's also been discussion with WMATA about construction on the actual metro center site. And, so I think those are hopeful signs of some additional housing that may go near metro. but all of these projects take years and years to come to fruition.
Thank you for the question. Cheryl Gannon.
Thanks. Over at parts of Northwest DC, like around Foxhall Road in that area, you can see a lot of pipe stem lots. And I'm wondering, how easy or hard is it to subdivide a lot of a certain size and just sell part of it, and that owner puts up a second house on the lot? And my broader question really is whether or not the things that we focus on really are pushing the dense housing onto the East County side. I'm thinking about the amendment that was adopted to take River Road outside the Beltway out of the equation. I was out there recently and I saw this lovely condo complex right across from the nursery. I think there's a lot of people who have cars and maybe are police or firefighters, teachers who live out there who would like to live out there. And I think the idea that just because there isn't a metro, we don't need to have people living there. I think there's an awful lot of land out there. And so I guess specifically the one instance I'm thinking about is, I would like to hear from Gwen about how easy or hard is it, and why isn't there more discussion about subdividing lots for a second house?
Well, it is possible to subdivide a lot for a second house. We have never really enthusiastically encouraged flag lots where you end up building a new house in the backyard of an existing house. And so there are certain rules about having to have a distance between the back of the existing house and where the front of the new house would be, so that you don't end up with a situation of houses in backyards. But, you know, certainly it's possible. And we did see our share of small single lot subdivisions, particularly in the part of the county that you were describing. They are typically not very beloved by the neighbors. And, there are lots of issues that are raised about tree preservation and stormwater management and so on with those kinds of small subdivisions, but that they absolutely do happen. I think from a bigger sort of macro perspective, one of the reasons we did the Westbard plan was to introduce more housing in an area that didn't have as much housing and had some just sort of large surface parking lots. And that project is being built out, which will include senior housing as well as townhouses. So we're adding housing in that part of the county. And, it is important to have more housing. I agree with you in every single part of the county, and that we need to have affordable housing in every single part of the county. And the goal is not to push it to the east. In fact, if anything, I think we were criticized for doing so many plans in the western part of the county between Bethesda and Chevy Chase Lake and Westbard, and all of which have resulted in significant increases in housing in each of those locations.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand people's concern about a backyard, but I've seen some very lovely sites with two houses, one behind the other. And when we discussed multifamily housing here in Woodside, it wasn't so much how many people were in the house or who they were, but it was the photos that the planners showed us of how much of the backyard was going to be paved for cars. And, how many trash cans, and is there a floodlight and a widened driveway to accommodate two-way traffic? It's really, and I think, I forget the man's name, but I think he's like a top person at the New Urbanism Council, wrote something saying that their research showed that the same thing, that people really aren't concerned with how many people or who's in the house, but what's happening on the outside. Trash cans, dumpsters, widened driveways, paved backyards. I wouldn't want the house next to me to have a paved backyard, like a parking lot. It's, so to me, in terms of the backyard issue, I would much rather see, I do have a neighbor with a very big double lot. I would much rather see another house back there than a paved backyard. But I do understand what you're saying about the backyard issue.
I think the paving is an issue, and that was one thing that, again, we hoped might be addressed in the pattern book, which is, again, is sort of guidelines for how to do this, of ways to deal with some of these design issues that make a duplex or triplex more compatible or less compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. So I do encourage folks to follow the pattern book issue.
Thank you, Cheryl. Karen Roper.
Hi, Gwen.
Hello.
Long time no see.
Absolutely.
We
I
can't
have to
see you,
say,
Karen.
you do look like you're enjoying retirement.
I am.
I want to ask something that I haven't seen dealt with, like inadequate facilities. I have, having lived here quite some time with very, 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 very undependable electricity, I have no confidence at all that our utilities can handle any of this, especially in down county. All this extra development. Is that been any part of the study at all?
No, that's a great point. I know that sewer has been, and that properties that redevelop have to have sewer capacity. But I haven't heard of a study about electricity. And I do know that PEPCO does participate in the Development Review Committee meetings. But I don't know, other than them looking at projects on a case-by-case basis, that there has been an overall study of the topic. And it's probably not a bad idea, because just like sewer capacity, we have a certain electrical capacity. Now, PEPCO may have done it, and I just don't know about it.
They're keeping it a secret if they did.
Yeah.
They're sending me colored brochures telling me what wonderful things they're doing that I can't read because the lights are out. That's my experience with PEPCO.
That's pretty bad.
Thanks, Gwen.
I've got a couple of questions I'd like to ask Gwen. One of them is, can a state law preempt the local jurisdiction's land use authority? It seems as if the governor's legislation would go pretty far into constraining what local governments could do with regard to zoning R60, R90, R200. Is it your understanding that it could be preempt from the state level?
That's a great question. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that generally that state law can preempt local law. But I don't honestly know the detail of that. I know in the legislation, the state legislation, it said that they would take local land use into consideration, but I think it could, I think, because the general rule is state can preempt local.
And we spoke about this a little bit this afternoon. What's your general assessment of other states, other jurisdictions, upzoning policies in terms of the impact on creating new attainable housing, affordable housing, deeply affordable housing? I know that the state of California sort of struggled with this issue the last couple of years. Minnesota, Georgia, among the jurisdictions that are looking at this. Have we seen any demonstrable evidence that changing the zoning results in more housing?
Well, and I said this to you, Alan, and I'll say it to everyone. I honestly do not think that the considerations of, and this is my personal opinion, which again, because I'm now a civilian, I can say, I do not think that changes to all of the single family zoning in any jurisdiction is going to be the solution to our housing crisis. I think that just as we saw with ADUs, you can permit ADUs and you do get some, which are great. And that's, you know, a nice small step forward in providing housing. But even if we changed all of the zoning for all of the missing middle uses for all of the single family zones, I think we would get a couple of hundred units. I think the solution is actually the corridor-based zoning, where you can do higher density, and actually that density can serve as a shield to the inner single family neighborhoods from the busier corridors where you're going to have traffic and transit and other uses, and it can serve the dual purpose of providing more housing, but also a benefit to the inner single family houses. I know there's been a lot of talk about changing single family zoning because of the history of exclusionary zoning. And if that is a decision that's made, on that grounds, that's fine. But I honestly do not believe that it is the solution in and of itself to our housing problem. And, I do strongly support the corridor housing. I've seen it work in other communities, but the reality is that, Alexandria and Arlington have both recently changed their single family zoning to address, to be more inclusionary. They're still arguing in the courts about some of this. California did a series of legislative changes. I mean, we just aren't seeing dozens and dozens and hundreds of houses in neighborhoods suddenly being converted. I understand the fear and I understand the concern, but I honestly think the more productive effort, where people actually might come together and find consensus, is to look at the corridors. And as I mentioned, the Attainable Housing Initiative includes an idea for an optional method of development along corridors that would include site plan, that would include an opportunity for community input. I feel like that's something that people could come together on and feel like is a good solution. But, again, I think that it's going to be hard to do that if folks keep, following the Carrie Lamari school of housing.
And a couple of other questions.
Wait a second here. Hold on now. You can't allow her to say that and then simply expect me to just pass it by. I spent 3 years working on this proposal. I presented articles from every jurisdiction in this country, including most of these housing institutions. Let's face it, when you increase the value of these properties by upzoning, you're precluding the affordability of housing. You're also not taking into account the correlation of impact between the stormwater management, the tree canopy, the infrastructure necessary to provide it. So let's think about all the consequences. But I guess I'm wrong, huh? Enough.
Harry, you're going to have your perspective and I'm going to have my perspective, and we're just going to disagree.
But you could at least been a little bit more respectful with that. We are entitled to our different perspectives. There's no question about it. And the fact of the matter is,
Carrie,
as
you
I've
are
said
the most
from the
disrespectful person I have ever dealt with in Montgomery County.
Well,
so don't tell me about disrespect.
That then.
Yeah, so
The consequences of the actions that you have worked for need to be addressed. You choose not to do that. You put it in an action report, which is separate apart from the Thrive document, right? That may or may not be addressed in God knows how many years. Now, if you say that's disrespectful, simply, I mean, I love how the woke nature that you're trying to use in housing here. You're trying to suggest simply if somebody is disagreeing with you and trying to provide
Hey,
relative
Alan, can we,
information,
this is not,
Yeah,
that somehow they're
Carrie,
disrespectful.
people are reacting.
No,
So,
Alan, this is ridiculous.
all right. So thank you, Carrie. We're trying to get some information. People have got some concerns. I want to ask one question. I'll go back to you, Cheryl. So two of the policies in Montgomery County, one policy in Montgomery County and PDUs has been focused on as an important housing approach. Is there a danger to increasing the percentage of PDUs in new development where it becomes counterproductive? I know that we were 12.5 and some people have talked about going up to 25%. That's my first question. The second question is, do you have any opinion on whether adaptive reuse of places like office buildings is going to be part of the solution?
So, I think that creating properties with 25 or 30% MPDUs or other forms of affordable housing is really hard to do economically without subsidies. And I think it's worth looking at how to subsidize and create those kinds of communities. We do have some where folks have put in 25 to 30% MPDUs. And another idea that we talked about was looking at the MPDU law to basically say, what if you do fewer units, but at a higher level of affordability? So we've talked about the fact that we need 30 to 50% AMI. Maybe the idea is to say if you do 30 to 50% AMI, but you do, and this is very radical, less than 12.5% MPDUs, maybe that's a good thing because then at least you're getting the 30 to 50% AMI units. That's an idea. Certainly on your second point about office buildings, I think that is a great opportunity. There is a project in Silver Spring that was done a number of years ago as condos. It's over near the parking garage not on Cameron, but the next street over. My brain isn't Fenwick, is it, I think, that has a great project that was an office building that was essentially completely renovated as very affordable condominium units. And it was financed in part by the housing, the HIF, the Housing Incentive Fund. So that was, I think that there are great opportunities to do that.
Thanks for that response. Two last questions. Cheryl Gannon and Ira Unger, then we'll conclude our featured presentation for this evening. So Cheryl, you go next. Cheryl, did you want to ask a question?
yeah, I'm doing it, Alan. Sorry. Okay. Oh, sorry, I was muted. Really, my question is based on some really excellent work that Kathleen Sammy has done on the tree canopy in downtown Silver Spring. And so I just want to give her credit for it. I didn't do this work, but it's depressingly low, 8% tree canopy. It's lowest in the county. And I see a lot of sort of smaller, what would really be regarded as ornamental trees, not canopy trees being planted. And there was a suggestion during the development review work group of having an environmental officer at the planning board. And I'm wondering if Gwen could comment on how did we get to the point where the tree canopy is only 8% in downtown Silver Spring in the process? Where does that go wrong? And do you think an environmental officer would help?
Well, I want to say we have staff in the planning department who are very, very avid and knowledgeable environmentalists. There are staff in each of the area teams who have, devoted their lives to environmental issues. People like Catherine Nelson, people like, oh, my brain is not working. Tina. I'm sorry. I can't even remember the names of my former coworkers. I've enjoying my retirement too much. So, there is a strong, environmental group within the planning department right now. And I think that they advocate for trees. There end up being, especially in very urban areas, lots of reasons why trees end up coming down. I mean, it would be interesting to know in Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring, what the tree canopy was 30 years ago. I don't know if that information is readily available, but essentially when Silver Spring developed in the 50s, or 40s and 50s, I've seen the historic photographs. There weren't very many trees. It was pretty empty. It was, it was dirt roads and and not very many trees. That's even a little bit earlier than the 40s and 50s. That's more like the teens and 20s. I think a lot of street trees have been planted and then taken down for projects. I know that Alan brings this up, and he's right, for projects like the Purple Line, where we've actually planted trees and they've grown to a pretty good size, and then they end up getting cut down again, which is extremely frustrating to everyone. I just think in urban areas, it's going to be really, really hard to find places to plant large numbers of trees. I can tell you that in other parts of the county, we're planting trees left, right, and everywhere. We did a program with Montgomery Countryside Alliance where we partnered with them to use penalty money to plant acres of trees. However, it's very hard in downtown Bethesda. It's very hard in downtown Silver Spring. I'm not saying we should give up, but finding the places to put the trees is a challenge.
I mean, I think this, like I said, this is Kathleen's work, not mine, but that the hole that you make for the trees has to be bigger than what is being done, because you can't get a big canopy tree. And that just has to do with street design. And so where the old park and planning building is, where the old park and planning building is, it's built almost really out to the street, really far out. And some trees came down there. But if you can build a sidewalk, or the adjacent area next to a sidewalk a little bit bigger and mandate a bigger tree hole, you don't have to plant a large amount in one space, but you could have a corridor like Georgia that is more or less lined with, not wall to wall, but has a long line of large canopy trees.
I think that's true. And I think that is something that should be worked on. Yeah, I don't disagree.
Last question, Ira Unger.
Hi. So you mentioned that you had hopes for building in corridors. Could you define corridors, please?
Well, in Thrive, there's a map that lays out the corridors, particularly where transit is going to be located. And it is those corridors where we really think the additional corridor-based development should occur. I've
talking about metro stations, essentially.
Well, no, not just metro, but BRT. I mean, I've jokingly said,
BRT.
if you look at Route 29 and all of the parking lots that are up and down Route 29, you could probably accommodate most of the county's future growth needs if you just redevelop those parking lots. There's huge facilities with huge empty surface parking lots.
So by corridors, then you're meaning also large streets, boulevards.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Again, there's a map. I can't tell you the page. I have it in front of me, but there's a map of the corridors in Thrive.
Thank you. Thank you.
And all right, so I have a last question. Has anybody has a prospect of using any of the ag reserve land for housing come up in the conversations in the planning department, or is that off limits 150%?
It came up in Thrive. We did have a number of people raise that, but that wasn't included as a recommendation in Thrive. And I think the ag reserve is intact, and from what I can tell, will remain intact.
Well, thank you so much, Gwen, for coming and joining our meeting. In February 2024, it's been quite a tour of the horizon of many, many different housing and transportation issues. I can't tell you how much we appreciate having your expertise, and we look forward to reaching out to you in the future about the specific issues, especially around the design excellence that we'd like to see in the neighborhoods and around the corridor-based planning, which we think is important as it can save the integrity of some of these long-standing residential neighborhoods, especially down county. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and sign off again.